Okay, so let me jump in. We should be seeing PolicyMap. And all right. So thank you so much for everyone's time today to learn a little bit about PolicyMap. I'm pretty excited to show you some of the features that we have. If you've used the tool before, you might have seen just how the tool works itself, but we've added some unique features and probably some cool data sets that might be of interest. So my goal today is really to give you a very broad use of PolicyMap, show you really how to use the basics of it, but I want to show you some of the key ways that other libraries have used it and are using it today with the tool itself. So some basic stuff. The first thing is you do have your own unique login into the State of Maryland Library Systems access to PolicyMap. So if you don't have a login and you need it, make sure you reach out to Yana and she'll get you all set up and such. If you do have any problems logging in, she is also your contact for any past resets and everything else. But once you do get in, you have your own login, and your own login basically allows you to do your own work, save your own work. No one has access to this work, so whatever you upload, whatever you build and such, it's solely within your account. There are some really unique ways to share the work, and we're going to show you that as well. So there's some really good chances for collaboration if you wanted to. But to start off, the map is pretty simple. It's fully interactive. So that means you can click and drag the map around. You can zoom in and out using your mouse wheel. You can use the little navigation bar on the right as well. So pretty basic stuff, right? The location bar, though, on the very top works like a Google Map search. This allows you to type in an address. And unfortunately, I only know one address, which is mine in Philadelphia. But we'll go back to Maryland in a moment. But if you type in an address, what it'll do is it'll drop a little pin in that location. And then again, you can zoom down to the given area, zoom out, pan around and such. So basic stuff really when it comes to the search function. But the search bar is also a geography search, meaning that you probably don't always have an address. You probably are working in maybe a city or a county and such. So this way you can type in something simple like Prince George's County, and the map will zoom there and it'll draw the boundary for that particular location. Boundaries themselves are what we call data. And the way the search bar works is that you're searching for one boundary at a time. So if you actually are looking for a map to make up something really simple, like maybe a handful of counties or even a handful of zip codes or even school districts, things like that, that is using the boundaries menu on the far left. What this will do is give you a list of all the different boundaries that we use in PolicyMap, but they also give you a chance to visualize those boundaries. So again, if you are looking for something like a map of counties, this allows you to make a really neat map that shows all the different counties in Maryland, as well as the area. Once you get the map to a given location, the next step really is why you're trying to use PolicyMap for, and that's adding data onto the tool. And that data is in these categories above the map, things like demographics, income and spending, housing and such. There's a lot of data in PolicyMap. You're going to really find out fairly quickly. So there's a really great place to start if you are not familiar with the data that's available. And it's this data directory tab in the top right-hand corner here. And I will send you this link in the follow-up email that will have the recording of the session as well. So that way, if you don't want to write it down, but it's a neat place to go to. And the way it works is that if you scroll down, eventually you'll come to a table of contents. And that table of contents mimics the categories that we saw in the tool. And the way it works is that it's going to tell you that if you want to look for something like quality of life, it'll tell you that within the section of quality of life, you'll find data that's related to grocery retail locations, brownfield Superfund sites, libraries, museums, other nonprofits, and then data like crime data, how people get to work, how people access the internet. So these for us are indicators that are related to neighborhood quality data sets. And the other benefit of this page is besides it's giving you a good summary of what you're going to find within one of these categories, it's going to give you some more details about the submenu itself. So something like in the case of travel time to work is going to give you the number of people that take less than 15 minutes, number of people that take 45 minutes to an hour, and so forth. The years that are available, depending on the source and the data, and then of course the geography, the data that's available out. We'll talk about that a little bit and go into the tool. So it's a great page to go to. That way, if you do just want to get a very broad overview and start seeing what data might be available within PolicyMap, you have that ability as well. Ooh, it's a good question. So the question is there a place where you can just basically text a list and see what data sets are available? Yes, that's a really great intro to the next search then. So the way the categories work here is that what we try our best to do is put data in a category that maybe makes sense for us and hopefully makes sense for the user that's trying to use the tool. And I'm going to highlight some of these categories just to give you a sense of where you might find data. But yes, yeah, if you just want to get to data and you want to really don't have to travel through these categories, you can use the other search bar on the top left. And this allows you to do just that. You can type in something very simple, say something like, um, income. You can do racial characteristics. So how many Vietnamese are in. So any type of keyword that you're looking for data-wise, this will give you a bit of chance. It'll dig through our metadata and then find the matching variable that relates to it. But as I mentioned, again, the categories that we try to put data into generally probably be the ones that you'll use the most are some of the ones that we'll try to highlight for you, which is really basic. So demographics is probably the most common variable you might use in general. So these are things like population data, racial characteristics, age. Some really unique data sets that might be of interest is things like language spoken at home. So this is a really neat map that shows the most common language, but that once you remove English and Spanish, you'll see the third most common language. We'll show you some of these layers in a moment. Family types are really important as of interest as well. So it's not just the household information, which is head of households, but family, which also includes, households, which also includes grandparents with children as well. So this is a very unique dynamic household where the grandparents have taken over custody and handled children's responsibilities. So it's a lot of different ways to look at persons and people, which is what for us demographics represents. Income and spending are some basic variables related to income and spending, might not be as much of an interest. It would help, would give you information about neighborhoods and families that are in maybe low income, giving them a chance to get different resources and grant applications for that funding. But as I mentioned, quality of life, probably a really unique characteristics for you to use because it will give you important information, things like what type of internet access a family has in a given area. This is a really neat data set from the census asking the general households what type of access they have to computer via the internet. And some don't have a computer at all. And so they're mainly just using something like a smartphone or tablet. And then of course, some have a combination of all three. So you can better understand the type of internet a household might have in a given neighborhood. You're trying to display that data. And even the quality of the internet comes into play as well. So even though some place might have internet, they might not have a really fast internet. So things like downloading movies or streaming things that are available through the library might not be available as well. There are some really unique characteristics for risk. So social vulnerability index is an index from the census that calculates a handful or a combination of different types of economic variables. And so these are the four together, and this is the overall score of the four. So things like socioeconomic, housing composition and such. I'm gonna display some of these for you in a moment. And then you also have what we call point locations, which are locations like libraries, museums, and then of course negative locations like brownfield Superfund sites and even areas that are flood zones and such. So a lot of really unique variables. And let's see if I can show you one of these variables at a time to give you an idea of how it's used. And we'll do something really simple and say, what's the language spoken at home? So one of my favorite pastelish color maps is this really unique map. And what it shows you is in the legend, it's going to give you all the tools to read the data. And the first thing is the title of the map. So this is the predominant language, not including English and Spanish, since English and Spanish are the most common language in the US. If you ever pull a data set up and you're not familiar with the data, click onto this little eye icon in the middle here. And this will give you what we call the data description. So it'll give you a really good summary and a sentence to explain the layer that you're looking at, the data layer you're looking at as well. and then the values of legends itself. So most of the legends in PolicyMap aren't this complex, but what you see with all these colors here is that what is shown on the map is the third most common language in that particular area. In this case, this is Chinese, this one. And then we have things like French, Italian. So if you know your neighborhoods a little bit, these are really neat ways to understand the different types of languages that might be available that you would want to offer maybe in a given neighborhood or the areas that you work at. Another really neat data layer for us is this one right here, which is predominant race ethnicity. So the way the census wants users to really look at racial characteristics is by looking at one race at a time, be it Asian, Black, white, and such. So a lot of times, though, people want to see how those things look together. And we made this really cool map that shows predominant race. So again, this is another one of these more complex legends, but what you see here is anything in a dark blue are areas that are predominantly white. Anything in a dark red are areas that are predominantly Hispanic, and then green are predominantly Black. So what you'll get is three really unique colors though, or four in this case. And so what you get is the darkish purples are areas that in this case, or darkish blues are 79% white. The dark orange, as you get a little further, is Hispanic. So the neat, you can start seeing areas that are more Hispanic than others, more white than others, and it's just the predominant race of that particular location. The unique colors are the ones that are the lighter colors, because in this example here, while white is the predominant race, it isn't the majority, meaning that the actual area itself is pretty mixed in that particular area. So a couple really neat data sets just related to demographics, which does tie into one of the questions about the 2020 census. So the one thing we want to remember is that the decennial census is really just 5 questions, 10 questions maybe. And it's really about counting number of persons. And with that survey, it does ask race or ethnicity as well. So that data is really only a handful of indicators in PolicyMap right now, which includes total population and racial characteristics. And that's really it. The annual census, which is the American Community Survey, that's the long form that's once was called. And it's like 32 pages long. It adds a variety of questions, and that's really where the bulk of the census data comes from. That's used more often. But if you want to see the 2020 census, it is available within the tool. It's just a handful of indicators, and I'll share a link that we wrote a blog about it, and that explains why what you see in the 2020 census today is really not the complete census, because the full census actually is released usually about a year after it's completed. So 2022 is the schedule. The beginning of 2022 is the schedule for the complete 2020 census. Yes, the ACS usually comes out at the end of December. The census did publish an update saying that it won't come out until April now, which is the ACS is the American Community Survey. It's the annual update from the census. And the reason for the delay is that they're going to join, as usual, the decennial census with the ACS. And so with that, I believe they want to give themselves a few more months to process updates together. Yeah, we generally have a really good process. We will get the census out and into PolicyMap probably a few days once it's published, but it's always that waiting time for that period. Yep, so you will have the ability to see 2020 census. And again, I mentioned the main character variables is demographics under population and then racial characteristics. So some other really unique variables is things like quality of life, as I mentioned, though the social vulnerability index is just a really, really unique index that does a very simple calculation. And each one of these indexes has a grouping of very specific data sets they've used to create this index. And this one here is probably my personal favorite, which is the Housing Transportation Index. So again, if you want to learn more about some of these indexes, click onto the eye icon. And in this case, you'll really see the full explanation of why or how this index was created. So in this case, it's taking a combination of number of housing units in the area. So they're looking at highly concentrated housing, so multifamily buildings, as well as non-traditional single house housing, and then compare that with car ownerships. And so with this, you start finding areas that have high concentration of people and housing of those people, but low concentration of car ownership. So transportation access is a vulnerability for these users. So this is really a neat map. If you wanted to start seeing something like where your libraries are in relationship to some of these locations, then you can add those two things together. So now you have some of the libraries, and then you can start seeing some of these pockets of areas that might have limited access to the library itself, where there is a high concentration of persons in that field. There are some really simple education variables as well. So if you want to see things like school locations, you can also see schools. We do have performance schools, meaning you can see school ratings and see how schools are rated between a 0 and a 10 from great schools. And then just general variables related to school, which includes enrollment, educational attainments. There are school district statistics, which includes graduation rates, student-teacher ratios, free reduced lunch, and then some of these more general variables. So those are some of the data sets that I just wanted to highlight a little bit. I can dig further into data if you're interested, but I definitely want to show you some of the other features. So some great questions that are coming through the chat. So if you do have any other questions, please just type them in. If you do want to see a data set that might be of interest or if you heard about, I can see if it's in the tool, and then we can show you a little bit about it as well. And then just the last part, which is my favorite, is the social vulnerability index. All of these variables are really unique in how they understand vulnerability. So housing and transportation, again, it looks at density of housing and low car ownerships. Minority status and language is another really unique one. This, of course, is a combination of persons that are not Hispanic, non-white in that area, but also language spoken at home. And then what you get are these areas that have a high score, which means they are high minority, low, or high, and then high non-English speaking. All maps within the PolicyMap tool can be exported. So the print function here allows you to take this map and download it onto your desktop. So from this, you can put it into a Word document, PowerPoint, presentation, or even grant applications. These little windows here are fully interactive, so you can click and drag the map around. You can zoom in and out using the scroll bar on the right and there, or your mouse wheel as well. On the right-hand side, just a little bit of customization, things like making the font larger and smaller, changing the orientation of the map, the formats, how you want to use this outside of the PolicyMap tool. So if you want to attach it to an email, you can definitely use a PDF. If you want to put it into a Word document or PowerPoint or presentation, PNGs are definitely much more dynamic. You can add, remove features, as well as even edit the titles. You can also save your map, allowing you to come back to this map later on. So if you decide to create this really unique map of maybe a case study you're trying to build for an application or a given neighborhood, save those maps, because this way you can come back to the same map a year from now if you want to revisit this application or revisit the study, and it'll be available here. And what this will do is it'll update to the most recent data available. So that way, if you follow up this map next year, you'll have the newest values available to present. And then the last part is that you can actually download any of the data that's in the PolicyMap tool as well. So if you wanted to take this data set and put it into maybe a very unique analytic that you're creating, or some ways to join data together, you can definitely download that data as well. Yes, so the question is, can you change the color palette? You can. There's only certain, in this case, this is what we call a categorical data, meaning that it's these solid colors. So you don't have the ability to change these colors, but if you change this to something very simple like population again, yes, you do have some palettes to choose from. All right, so let's come back to the data a little bit. There's probably some really unique ways to use the tool, so I'm just going to show you the 2 ways that I know some of the public library users are using it, and then at the end of this, if there's any other questions of how you want to use it as well, let me know as well. So one of the big ones is the ability to collect data for some applications or some grants, and collecting that data, you can do it a handful of different ways. But the first really big way is to define the area that your coverage is you're trying to cover. And there's a couple easy ways. You can simply just type in, of course, the county that you're working in or the area as well. Or you can also make what we call a custom boundary, which is a boundary that could be a containment of a handful of places or areas. And we call those things custom regions. And there's 3 unique ways to make a custom region within the tool. The draw feature allows you to do just that. You're just simply just drawing on top of the map. So the click feature here allows you to click onto the map. What you're doing is you're just dropping the vertices of a given area. You can zoom in. You can pan around. I'm going to make a really complicated map. At least you can see how efficient it is. It's a matter of just moving your mouse and clicking with the area. Then when you're done, click onto the first point or a point, and it will close your custom region. And you can fix points at any time simply by clicking and dragging the points around or adding new junctions. When you're done, click Save and Close, and now we have the ability to give it a little custom name, as well as some customizations. You can change the color as well, and then the transparency of the inside of the area. So a drawn custom regions is very unique. It allows you to be very fluid in the boundary that you're creating. But sometimes, I think more in the case of libraries, that you need to make a boundary that are based off of other geographies. And those other geographies probably are geographies that you commonly use, things like zip codes, maybe counties and such. So we call that function an assemble custom region, because you're doing just that. You're taking boundaries that are in PolicyMap and you're assembling them to make a new one. So it initially defaults to this current zoom level, which are these boundaries called tracks. But from this menu here, you can see that there are other boundaries to choose from. It's, again, more commonly ones that you might be of use. So zip codes, county subdivisions, usually sometimes considered a neighborhood, depending on the area that you're in, and then even larger boundaries like counties and such. Zip codes are simply assembling custom regions, simply just clicking onto the map. If you make a mistake, you can deselect areas at any time. But when you're done, you want to click on to continue, and again, give it a custom name. All right, we have a drawn custom region, an assemble one, and then the last one is the radius, and probably one that you might use more often than not. And this allows you to do a couple of things. You can type in an address and then define the size of the radius. Or let's add libraries back on the map. Or you can simply just click around a point, defining the radius, and then it will draw, in this case, a 2-mile radius from the point that we clicked onto the map. And again, give it a custom name. All right, so we have a drawn custom region, assemble, a radius. So those are the 3 basic boundaries. Oh, it's a really good question about boundaries. For now, in the case of custom regions, understand that besides being able to visualize the areas that you're working in, and you can also, as you can see, display them all at once, they have a little bit of customization behind them. And that's available in this little menu that you see in that little shape there. And these menus include things like taking it to other features of PolicyMap, downloading the data, seeing this data in a tabular format, and then even clipping the data on the maps function itself. So the reports is probably one of the most useful ways that libraries use it in the tool, because this allows you to take this boundary into our reports feature, which is the button on the top right hand corner, but it's just basically a quick way to get there. So I'll take us there directly. Reports for us is probably a much more traditional way to look at data when you think about data. These are tables and charts that you see data that's aggregated to it. And what you see from these reports that these are pre-built reports. So you don't have the ability to customize the data within each report, but these reports will give you, hopefully, pieces of data that you're trying to look in one contained area. The community profile report is probably the most commonly used report for our public libraries, because this is really just a demographic report. But from this, it'll give you a lot of other parts of the data that's related to demographics, housing information, crime data, job types, and such. So you can make a report either on the fly, meaning you can type in a city or a county or a zip code right here. You can radius on the fly, and then if you made those custom boundaries or custom regions, you can access them from this menu as well. So in this case, this is my 3-mile radius from the library that we select in the middle, Wheaton, and then click generate. And what this will do is it'll take the radius and it will aggregate the geographies that sit within the radius, and it will only count the ones that have at least 50% of its area are contained within the radius. So in this example, it's showing us there's 34 census tracts in the 2000 years, and then 34 tracts in the most recent ACS as well. So the top will give you some basic information, things like congressional districts, Senate districts, local legislative districts. So you have a little bit of reference of who to contact if you are trying to contact those representatives. But then more importantly, the aggregate data for that radius. So what the population was in 2000, what it was in 2010, what it is in the most recent ACS, and then the percent change calculation. So almost a 16% change. This will give you the racial characteristics of that particular area, and again, the comparisons of that place. So the increase in minority population, the age distribution, the income distribution. So majority of the income here is more in that middle income area, for 50,000 and up. What you'll get as a comparison to the county, as well as the state, of course. Immigration information, family types, households, and then we start leaving the community, the person's part of it. And now we start talking about the community part. And so this starts talking about the type of housing that's in this given area. So 61% is single family detached homes. So those are homes with lawns and such. But then there are about 27% living in small and large apartment buildings. How many households own the home, vacancy information of persons or residential and commercial, unemployment information, job types, and even a little bit of crime data for the county. So this is a really neat report. As you can see, it's going to give you what we sometimes call a snapshot of life in a given area, because it's really trying to contain a lot of those pieces of data that you're trying to collect individually into one much more complete report. You can join that report with any of the other reports available. So a home mortgage report is a really neat one. It talks more about the type of loans in a given area. There's a fantastic health report that you can generate. These are all a variety of different health indicators that we use within the tool, giving you more information about that particular area. So one of the questions, as we're talking about custom regions, was can you import shapefiles? So unfortunately, the way the PolicyMap tool works, that you don't have the ability to import spatial files at this time. So hopefully you don't have too many complex shapefiles. There is the inverse of that, though, is that if you ever wanted to take data in PolicyMap and pull it into an ArcGIS or QGIS to use with shapefiles, the export will give you a lot of boundary data, so that way you can join it to boundary itself. Question is it possible to apply data layers to custom regions? Oh, it does not at this time aggregate data for a custom region automatically. The little bit of calculation, I think the question is, would it be able to aggregate the data for the boundary itself? No, but you can download this data fairly quickly, and then of course do a bit of that customization or the aggregation if you wanted to as well. I can show you this as we get a little bit further. All right, so that will actually lead us to the next session, which is being able to work with this custom region a little further. The other thing that's really used about custom regions for our public libraries is the ability to share this boundary with other users. So in this function, you can share it from the window here, or if you open up the custom region menu and it says view my regions, these are all the boundaries that I just created. And then you can access them here by editing the boundaries. You can delete them completely, or in this case, you can actually put this custom region into a handful of different ways to share. You can actually put it into the entire site license for Maryland. So anyone that comes to the Maryland State Library site license will have access to this boundary. It'll also appear here as well, but it'll have that author's name in there. But more commonly, the users that are sharing. Right, I just start with that. More pop-ups out there. The option is to share it by individuals. I've never had it not appear. It's probably just sitting there somewhere behind the scenes. And then that allows that person to only have access to your custom region. So that way it's more specific how you share. That person will have it in their account. They can open the boundary and then access and use those boundaries individually as well. So it's probably one of the most common ways that public libraries use it as a tool to collect data for applications and grants. The reports allows them to get that quick snapshot. And in the case of trying to download data for a given area, then what happens here is that once you have your custom region created, if there were any pieces of data that wasn't in the report that you're looking for, then you can just add it to the map. So let's say we want to find out of these places what the number of households that just use a smartphone for internet in a given area. So what this initially does is shows this really kind of dark colored map, and you can't really see it, but within our boundary are a handful of these geography census tracts that have the number of persons, actually over 87% of the persons. So the default variable in the legend for some data sets is is the percent of people by a certain value. But the legend allows you to do a lot of really neat customizations besides changing the year. You can also change how it's being shown in the map. So instead of percentage of people that uses smartphone for the internet, you can see the number of persons. And so now the legend changes from percentages to count. And now the dark purples are areas that have over 1,797 people. And then as you can progress, go through the numbers that way. So once you have your custom region and layer data, this menu comes into play much more. You can do a couple of really powerful things. The first is the ability to actually just isolate the data and simplify the map. So now it just shows data for the area of my custom region. So it's now just a containment of that particular area. And in this case, just a handful of tracks that are in my containment. So the clip allows you to do visually to contain that data. That also allows you to print a map that shows just that clipped area as well. So if you ever wanted to present a map and just simplify the map, the data that's in the map, then you have the ability to show just that data in that process. But more importantly, you can then download this data into an Excel spreadsheet. And so from this allows you to take the data that's in the map, download it, and it'll give you a list of all the census tracts that are in my drawn or my assembled custom region, the value of each one of those tracts, and then you can do your own aggregation from that download. And this can be done for any data layer that's in the tool, as well as any data points. So if you wanted to find out how many public schools are in your area, you can change this and say, I want to download all the public schools that are in my containment. So these files download directly. I know I always have a little problem with Zoom because I'm in a weird session, but it'll generate in this process. Yeah, so yeah, the one of the really neat ways is the ability to make your members map and basically show where their overlap of coverage might occur in that area. All right, hopefully that download doesn't take too long. As it's doing that, I'll show you one last feature, and that's really one of the biggest uses that we have for a couple of libraries in Maryland as well. Unfortunately, those features, there we go. Unfortunately, those features are in what we call the legacy version of PolicyMap, and I'll show us that in a moment. But here's our file. These are all the public schools that we're looking at. So these are all the points, and for some reason I lost my layer data. But you can see what you get when you download data. In the case of point data sets, it's every piece of the school data. So it's not just the school information itself, but it's also things like total number of students, student teacher ratio, count by type of class, a lot of really unique variables related to school locations. Right, and then the last thing I just want to talk about is the ability to actually add your own data into the platform. And this is a very unique way to start understanding the coverage of your patrons and maybe where they're coming from. And then, of course, where you might find lapse of coverage in those areas. Unfortunately, that function right now is in what we call the legacy version of PolicyMap. What you'll find out is that we've undergone a about 2.5-year project of upgrading PolicyMap. We're really close. We're almost to the end, but there are a handful of features that are in what we call the legacy version, and they're almost done, and they pretty much will be on the legacy on the new version of PolicyMap. So to accommodate some of the users that still use those features, and really the data loader is that big function. There's a link at the very top which says go to PolicyMap Legacy. And this will take us to the legacy version. And as you can see, it looks exactly the same, a little bit maybe dated in maps and such, but the buttons, the navigation is pretty much all the same. You can always go back to the new version of PolicyMap by simply clicking that same link in the very top. So you can toggle between those two features. But in the case of legacy, we're going to use it because the data loader right now is only available in the legacy as we're almost done with it. And the goal of the data loader is to give users the ability to add your own data into PolicyMap. And some of this data can be anything from survey data to business locations if you're working on that type of project, or in the case of a lot of our public libraries, commonly the ability to upload your patron data. Remember, this login that you have means that only your login has access to this data set. So no one else can see this data. We are HIPAA compliant because the way the data itself is uploaded. If you're ever concerned about privacy rules for a lot of users, we'll also just basically anonymize the data, meaning they strip away any personal information or individual information about that, and they simply just use the data as an address that they can just upload. So from this, the process upload is really simple. It's probably one of the easiest features within PolicyMap. We'll give it a custom name. Choose how you want to share it. So again, myself only means that only your login will have access to this data. But there are options. If this data set isn't privacy sensitive and you want to share with other users, then you have the ability to share it with the entire state of Maryland license or with select individuals in that process. Choose icons, choose colors. And then unfortunately, I only have a PA data set. And then once you go through the process, From this, it'll identify some really important things because this is what we call a point-based data loader, meaning that it only loads address level in data. So if you do have shapefiles or data that's at geographies like cities or counties and such, the data loader doesn't load that data at this time. But if you have addresses of people and places or things, then this is the exact tool you want to use. So because of that, we only require in your file the address, city, state, or zip in your file. You can have as much information as you want outside of that. So this is a very simple public library data set. So things like name, types, and such, these are dynamic fields that come from that particular database. And again, you can have as much data as you want in here, or you can have as little as you want. And the only thing we need is the address, city, state, and zip. So this will go through the process of geocoding. It'll basically upload the file and then give you basically a table visual of your spreadsheet. So these are all my columns for my spreadsheets, all the rows, and then I can edit the data within the fields, sort them and such. But when I'm done, click Save and Close, and I've gone from a spreadsheet of addresses in my, let's see, it gives you some more specific about it. Awesome. On my desktop to being able to visualize those addresses as points on the map that I can click onto and see as well. So you can upload as many data sets as you want, and that way it'll exist only within your account. And if you wanted to actually use this data outside of just your account, then you do have options to make it shareable or however you want to use it. But once you uploaded it into PolicyMap in the legacy version, this data is now available in the new version of PolicyMap. So I can then now take this to PolicyMap. Oh yeah. That button. Now, if I were to go to PA, that's where my data set is located. My data will be available in this tab here. All right, I'm mistaken. It is only available in legacy for now. That's right. We're adding this layer for you. So there's my data set. This will be available here. And then now I can see my points on the map. Those two things are all tied together. So I can always access my points. And then while my points are here, I can now see and use my data alongside all the other data sets that we've sort of mentioned. I can see it against boundaries. So if you're looking to do grant applications, maybe you're doing it against funding for legislative districts, you have the ability to visualize your points alongside legislative boundaries together. So you can visually show a map of those areas. But more importantly, of course, you can take this data and put it alongside other data layers. So that way, if you're looking to identify your patrons, let's look real quick. I can see where my points are in relationship to things like language spoken at home, access to the internet, demographics of a given area. Are we in areas that are growing in population of a certain race or characteristics? Are we in areas that speak a certain language, or in areas that we're handling that are facing income calculations? So this gives us a very simple map to visualize our patron data alongside other layer data sets at the same time. And then the last feature that's probably used the most is the ability to actually join our patron data or data sets that you've uploaded to data that's in PolicyMap. So if you wanted to find out how many of your points you've uploaded are in areas of certain incomes, certain language spoken at home, health indicators, has access to the internet or not, so more common variables really like that, you can join those two things together by displaying both data sets in the map at the same time. So in the case of my points, when they're here, if I wanted to find out the median household income of each place that a point sits in, what I can do is overlay income data on the map. And now I can join those two things together and download them together by using the download icon up there. So this download icon is the same download that's in the clip function that we showed on the new version of PolicyMap. In this case, it just has a modal. It has the modal has the same download features that it's in that clip. But the third one is probably one of the most unique ways to download. What this does is that it's going to join your point data set that you've uploaded. So it could be your patron data to any data that's in PolicyMap, meaning that you can start tagging data of your patrons of things like what they speak at home after English and Spanish, how many of them use a computer or not have a computer to access the internet, household incomes, basic demographics. So from this, you choose the area you want to do the containment. So all my points are in Pennsylvania, but for you, it could be a county, a custom region, or the state. And then this will download into an Excel spreadsheet. So this modal that you see here, this will actually be available in the new version of PolicyMap fairly soon. So you'll have to toggle back and forth when you do this. And then what you get from this page is that instead of just a list of all of your points, which for me was all public libraries, but we get something that the points are joined to. So now all the public library locations are joined to the census tract that they sit in. And then within each census tract, we get the number, we get the median household income of each tract. So you can do this over and over again. And the benefit of this is that you are basically building data onto your patrons or whatever point data set that you're uploaded to give you a lot of really unique variables to understand the overall persons in that given area. Yeah, so one of the questions is, can we increase the number of rows? So at this time, the way the data loader works is that we it's a 5,000 address per row per file. It actually was 10,000. So we reduced it just temporarily because we're doing a bunch of infrastructure updates. And with that infrastructure update, we're just trying to make sure the timing's correct. Things don't fail more often. So more than likely, it'll be back up to 10,000. And we believe it'll be much higher than that because we're able to push it with the infrastructure upgrades. So 10,000 will be the norm again. And we believe it will be able to get up to 25,000 per file. The good news is that's not the limit. You can actually upload as many data sets as you want of that 5,000 or eventually 10 to 25,000. It's just that a per file limit is the limit at this time. And the big reason for that is the HIPAA compliance, how data is processed from your desktop to our cloud services before a third-party tool has to come in. And once that third-party tool comes in, it breaks HIPAA compliant because the data is not direct anymore. It's being touched by another tool, and then that other tool has to goes through the same process, which we don't want to deal with for now. Okay, so two really complex, but hopefully the last one's a little more complex. I do apologize. It is one of the most unique ways to really use the data, and that's joining your point data sets to any data sets in PolicyMap. And the goal of that is to give you the ability to start better understanding each person that's in your library system, and then start finding out maybe some similarities, some differences based on those data sets that you're joining to each person as well. Making custom regions and then using reports probably is the most common way because that allows you to make these quick reports of data for a given area that you're working in. All right. Any other questions I can help answer? Anything you want to see in particular? Okay.
I have a quick question. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm just muting myself because I can't type fast enough. So is the census tract level the smallest geography it goes down to, Phil, or do you also have block group?
We do, yeah. So block groups is the smallest geography we use.
Okay.
It also depends on the data. It's a really good question. So I think we're all sort of familiar with boundaries, but if you aren't, I'll just show you a really neat way to understand those and the way our maps display it. the census that we do every 10 years and with the decennial census, and then of course every year with the American Community Survey. When they publish data, they do not publish individual information. They group people together into geographies. And the smallest geography we use is what is called a block group. So these first two columns from the boundary menu is really neat because it gives you this really cool window into the building blocks that the census uses to aggregate data up to the very top, from block groups all the way up to states and the national number. So I'll give you some context, and that way you'll see how these work a little bit. A block group, as you can see this crazy map, is basically about 400 to 1,500 people live within the block group. And the reason for that is, as you can see, density of population. So if we go to a more rural area, these are really large block groups. I'm guessing not too many people live in this particular block group. But if we get to more of the city area, I used to live in Montgomery Village, these are much smaller because the density is much smaller. A block group, then a grouping of block groups or a block group then form what is called a census tract, which is the next geography up. And so you can see tracts and block groups pretty much align all together. And if I were to do a little bit of customization, like changing the line width and the color, you can start seeing how block groups sit within a tract. And so a tract is about 1,500 to 5,000 people. And depending on where you're at, a tract, if you're in, I believe I go to someplace like Baltimore, DC, a tract can sometimes be considered a neighborhood in a given area. But if you go to a more rural area, tracts can sometimes be like a township or an unincorporated town or such. And so those are the building blocks for the census. From there, it goes up further and further. Tracts form zip code equivalents. Tracts also form county subdivisions, which are generally neighborhoods. County subdivisions form counties, and then we have states and such. But yeah, block groups in general are mainly available for the census 2020 or the decennial census data. There are just a handful of data sets that are available for block groups from the ACS, but not that many. The ACS has pretty much moved all the way to census tracts for the lowest geography in aggregation. So generally, you'll find block groups available for the decennial census itself. Oh yeah, so you saw the provincial boundaries. If anyone ever wants any of these boundaries that are available, we have a whole list of these. So the neat thing about the tool, and as well as for the site licenses, if there are custom boundaries like we have here, we can always load custom boundaries for our site license users. And if you want access to these, just let me know. I'll send that link that has a list of all these boundaries, and we can add them to everyone's account or the entire state library license as well. Sure. So the question is about these darn county subdivisions. They are really tough to explain. I probably won't do a really good job. So what I will do is I'll send you the description for it. County subdivisions is basically the census trying to basically make a neighborhood. I mean, to a very layman's term, it's the census equivalent of a neighborhood. But the problem is neighborhoods, as you can see from this simple map here, really don't cover unincorporated townships well. And so things like Glenmont, Four Corners and such, these are unincorporated towns, but they probably are only considered neighborhoods. So because of that, a county subdivision is a bit of it's the census equivalent of a neighborhood that doesn't really represent well. It works better in New England, originally, which is where the area term itself originally originated. But once you get out of New England into the rest of America, county subdivisions are a little more awkward to explain.
I know, just from my own, I think for Maryland, if you're trying to get down to approximate neighborhoods, usually the census tract is good enough. In Baltimore, I actually just specifically asked for Baltimore because that's where I live, but for Baltimore, a block group is better, just because of how neighborhoods are here. And so for neighborhood type branches and in some of these cities, you may have to get down to the most detailed geography you can. So which is why I asked how far, how small do we get?
Colin added that some census information, the furthest it goes down. There, I mean, generally, most of our data tracks. We try to make sure that tracks is the base. There are just a handful of data sets, things like multifamily data sets, HUD indicators. HUD generally uses census county subdivisions as a base. But most ACS will go, yeah, HUD's doing, yeah. Most ACSs will go below, down to the track at the very minimum, and then the block group, depending on you go. So there is a lot of data. I hope you do take a moment, explore a little bit of the data directory. I will send this video as a follow-up so that way Yana can share with everyone. And then with that, I'll give you all the links that are available, things like support pages, my contact information, the data directory and such. So if you run into a situation when you learn more about the tool or features, you're also welcome to email it at any time.
Thank you so much for doing this training for us. This was a lot of valuable information. I know I get so excited that we have access to this tool here in Maryland. So, and if anybody has any questions about accessing the site itself, just go ahead and get in touch with me and I'll be happy to help you. So let's just give Phil a hand and thank you so much again.
Yep, and Jennifer, I'll respond to you via email afterwards. It's a really good question about multi-layer maps. But if you have any other questions, anyone, my information will be sent to you. So email me at any time. I'm happy to talk more about things. I'm a big data nerd and I love it. All right.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Yana.
Bye. Thank you.